You know, a map isn't just a picture of a place, it's an argument, it's a story. For centuries, we've used maps to do more than just get from point A to point B. We've used them to understand our spot in the world, to define power, to tell ourselves who we are. Now think about it. A medieval map wasn't really used for navigation, it was a map of your relationship with God. A modern map, with all of its data and its precision, argues for a world that we can understand through science. But the maps that we create for our own worlds, for our stories, our D&D games, our private universes, they have to do both. They need to be a tool and a treasure, a guide and a gateway. And today, I'm not just going to show you how to draw a map. I'm going to show you how to breathe a soul into a blank piece of paper, to turn it into an artifact from a world that feels like it exists just out of reach. I'm going to walk you through my personal method for creating a region map, one that I can not only use to develop the world and is a tool in and of its own creation to help me world build and understand the history and the cultures of the place that I'm mapping, but something that is also so good looking that I can stick it on my wall and refer to it over and over and over again. Something that is just as much an artwork and a trophy of the world building that I've done as it is a usable, practical piece of that world. And the whole process is a journey in parts. First, we're going to lay the groundwork with a pencil sketch, so where we figure out the story of what our map is actually for. And for this project, it's a client's tabletop campaign. This is a commission that I've gotten. Second, we're going to bring it to life with ink. We're going to focus on the techniques that can create layer, depth, and character, and this is where the art really happens. And then we'll layer in the function of it, the tiny labels, the cool symbols, and all the little details that make a map genuinely useful and believable. Hello adventurers, and welcome back to the Red Quills. My name is Ryan, and today we're going to go into my personal map style. But first, we're going to start out with the tools that we're using. I'm going to start with this blank A2 sheet of watercolor paper, 120 GSM thick, and I'm only going to be using pens today. Various thicknesses of black pens, yes. I'm going to be talking about how I can use them as accurately as possible, but more importantly than anything else, I want to make this map as accessible for everyone as possible, which means I'm going to be using the simplest tools that are available to me. We're going to get our pencil out first and do a quick sketch. Now, the blank page can be a little intimidating, right? It's so much empty space. Our first job is to tame it, to give it some structure and purpose. And this sketching phase is honestly the most important part of the whole process. A mistake with ink can become a happy accident, but a mistake in the basic layout is a flaw you can't really fix. So first things first, who is this map for? What does it need to say? And for this guide, I'm making a map of Blackroot Mountain for a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. It is a commission, which means that I've been given a fair amount of information, but also, happily, a fair amount of freedom with which I can explore creating this world and adding a little bit more prompt to it so that it can be explored later on. This map needs to show a massive multi-leveled cavern system, not a whole world, just one focused area. And that decision alone gives us our star of the show. We're going to place the main large caverns right in the middle of the place, letting them know the composition. And that way anyone knows immediately when they're looking at it what is important. So then we actually sketch out the land, or in this case, the lack of it. And forget trying to draw a perfect, clean outline. Real caverns are fractal and chaotic and messy, and I want to copy that. And one of my favorite tricks for a natural-looking cavern system is a little bit of controlled chaos. Your hand and the muscles in it naturally shake as it tries to control a certain amount of tension. And you can definitely use that, particularly with a pencil. Hold it quite lightly and generally sketch out the rough area of the tunnels that you want. Allow your hand to jump a little bit. Give it a little bit more oomph and gusto. Because remember, at this point, you can erase things later on if you want. Once you've got the main outline of the cavern, then you can add in the tall stone pillars, the various passageways, the different ledges, all of the smaller details that make the cavern feel a bit more real. Then you can draw underground rivers, and the golden rule here is very, very simple. Water always flows downhill, and once you are underground, it does not stop doing that. It always takes the path of least resistance. Your rivers should start from higher level sources and then flow down into subterranean lakes or disappear into deeper fissures. They should meander, they should snake, they should join up with other streams and get bigger as they go. A river should never split on its way to its destination. It can break into a delta right as it enters a lake or an underground sea, sure, but it doesn't just fork into two equally large rivers. That's not how physics works. Draw single, confident lines for your rivers from high ground to low ground. And finally, in this pencil phase, you've got to think about where the hidden forests and the other big biomes are. Look at your pillars and your rivers. Where would life thrive? A vast cavern with a water source might be home to a sprawling fungal forest. A secluded damp area could host a field of bioluminescent flora. Lightly sketch the general shapes of these unique biomes, and don't draw individual mushrooms, just the general outline of the area. Think of big sweeping shapes. And before you even think about picking up the pen, take a good look at the pencil sketch, look at it from a distance, look at it close up. It should be a ghost of the final map. You've made the big calls now, you've got the geological story of the place, you've set up a clear visual hierarchy, you've turned the blank page from a void into a place, and now, and only now, are we ready to make it permanent. Now we ink. And this is the part where the map gets its soul. Our goal here is what I call evocative inking, and this means that we're not just tracing our pencil lines, we're interpreting them. We're going to be erasing them later on. So every single touch of the pen should add texture, depth, and character. It's that sweet spot between art and information that makes the map special. And we're going to use different line thicknesses or line weights to communicate information and create that visual hierarchy. And that's probably the single most important technique that I can teach you. Thicker lines means, look here, this is important. Thinner lines are for finer details. What I'm doing, and I've had a few questions in previous videos about how I decide how chaotic, how fractal to make a coastline. It's really, really simple. If you're doing a pencil sketch early on, what you want to be doing is using the pencil sketch to give it an organic feel. Think about how it would look if erosion wore it all out, how it curves around, make sure that it doesn't look too jagged in terms of the big shapes, make it feel organic and natural. Then when you come in with a pen, you keep very, very close to that line, and the jagged edges, the points, their roughness comes from very, very small variations on that big organic straight line. The variations make it feel fractal, the straightness of the line makes it feel real. So let's start with the cavern walls, the border between open space and the solid rock. And this is the place of texture and a lot of shadow, and our ink should show that. So I'm grabbing my thickest pen for this. This is a 0.6mm black fine iron pen. I'm going to trace out the pencil outline, not just drawing one smooth line. I'm going to rough it up. I'm going to stutter the pen. I'm going to make little jags and breaks. I'm going to go over the line again in some places to make it thicker, to suggest some more rugged, unworked stone. Then I'm going to come back with a second pen to add some texture in a thinner, finer line with a 0.2mm fine liner pen, just outside the first one, loosely following the curves. And that adds the immediate sense of depth there. If you want even more texture, you can try adding tiny fine dots along the base of the walls to show rubble or scree. And this is called stippling, and it's a fantastic way to build up some tone. And what I've done for this map as well, because it's a map of an underground area and I want to show different depths, is I've used that main outline, that thick outline on all the caverns, and the second outline, the thinner one, to show which caverns are deeper than the others, to show the relative depth. I have a vertical inset on one side that gives a bit more detail on that, but I want it to be obvious looking straight down, which caverns are close to the surface and which ones are deeper into the earth. And that is an easy way of doing that. Now we do the great pillars and the rock formations. This is where we get really artistic. But whatever you do, don't just draw a bunch of identical cylinders. That looks boring and fake. And instead, we're going to build rock formations that feels huge and ancient. We're going to start with that thick pen, and we're going to do that again. The important thing to note is that they will never be symmetrical unless they're purposefully built. They're going to be scattered, they're going to be weird, they're going to be different. And oftentimes, they're going to separate larger parts of the cavern, taller parts of the cavern from smaller parts of the caverns. So you can show the relative height of the ceiling of individual caverns by placing the pillars in specific spots. And then we go through and we detail what the floor looks like. I've got one cavern which is a giant underground lake. I've got another cavern which is a marshland. And I've got a couple of caverns that have forests underground of, fungal forests and dim light trees that can exist in the very low ambient light that can be found in the Underdark. And so what I wanted was a method that was really, really simple of showing that. The water, very, very simple, just the thinner and thinner lines like I do on a continental map. I'm using very, very thin 0.05 or 0.1 to show those lines. And on the marshlands and the forests, I'm using very small stippling techniques, dotting in triangles of 3 for the marshlands and using simple crosses of varying sizes and thickness for the mushroom forests. And in that way, you can show a density on the ground without going into too much detail into actually what makes that level of ruggedness. You don't need to show every individual tree. You just need to give the impression of density there. And that's a really good way of doing that. Rivers and lakes are next. And the thickness of the line that you use for a river should tell you how big it is. There's only a couple on this map, and I've used a medium pen for those, a 0.4 or a 0.2. And as we move from the downstream areas to upstream, and I would recommend drawing in that direction because it means that when you finish the stroke, you can stroke upwards, which leads to a really nice fine point. Go from 0.4 at the bottom to the 0.2 at the top because that slow thinning of the line would really help you to show the thickness of the river as you go through. And then we step back and we look at the inked map, and the pencil lines are gone, and what's left is a stark black and white world, but it's still fairly empty. It doesn't have people. In the next step, we'll fix that. We'll add a bit more detail to it. So our map is now a beautiful piece of art. It's got some basic labels, but art alone is not enough. What I'm going to do to make this map into something that's really in my style is I'm going to add in some more world building details on the side. We need to add the data that makes this a useful storytelling or world building tool. And this is where we add some more cities and tunnels if we need to. We can add in some more labels if they're small enough. But again, remembering that the purpose of the map is for navigation and for understanding the world. Don't clutter it up with information on the map itself. We're going to put some symbols down, and then we're going to add in some world building notes on the outside. But this is where I want to talk about the labeling that I've done, because as you might have noticed, I used a specific font when I made this map to make it look super cool. And that involved deciding what the letters would look like early on, and then using a 0.2mm black fine liner pen to make characters that look, honestly, my inspiration was the Draconic language from the Elder Scrolls video games, because I really like how they look like someone scratched into rock, and I wanted to really have that feeling for this underground area. So they're thicker at the top, and they always thin down to a thin basic line, and that's how we do that. We've got these little serifs as well as we go through. So using a thick pen for the stems and then a thin pen for the points and the serifs gives us that impression as we go through, and I've got it in several different thicknesses there. The real secret to good labeling is writing incredibly small and writing incredibly slow. Use your finest pens if you want to, a 0.05 if you've got one, and you can write horizontally wherever you can. For things like rivers or winding funnels, it should follow the curve of the feature, but otherwise you want it to remain as horizontal as possible. And seriously, practice on a piece of scrap paper first. Do not rush your labeling. The goal is for the labels to feel like they're part of the map, not just slapped on top. And if an area gets too crowded, don't try to cram it in. This is why you should be trying out the locations of your labels in the sketch as well. And you may notice as we're going through here as well that I've used thin dotted lines to show the tunnels that connect different passages. And what I've done is I have varied the size of the dotting on the lines according to, again, the depth, in the same way that I talked about having the cavern depths as being easily recognizable in terms of distance. I've done that from the top down in terms of the thickness of the tunnels. The thickest dotting of the lines is the tunnels that are closest to the surface. And as you go further and further in order to really show that concept of depth and distance from the viewer, those dots get smaller and smaller and smaller. So I've gone from 0.4 down to a 0.05mm pen to get that feeling of depth and separation there. And this brings us to one of my favorite parts of this style, the insets and the annotated borders. The main area map is sacred, and we want to keep it as clean as we can. The corners and the edges are where we can pack in extra info. In one corner, I've got a little inset map, which is a zoomed in view of the lost city, for example. And in the other corner, I've got another inset, which shows the vertical distances between all the various areas. And I've got different levels that you can measure them at, whether they're near to the surface, whether they're deep beneath the surface. And the borders of the map is your space for notes. This is where you put your key. You can explain what all the symbols mean if you need to. It's also, more importantly, where you add the historical facts, the little bits of lore. That's what I most like doing. You could have a note about ancient battles that happened in the cavern, mythical beasts that have lairs and specific tunnels. More and more about your history and your notes on your world building can come in here. And these little notes add in so much flavor and turn the map from a drawing into a historical document that you can stick on your wall. And then finally, add the last little touches. A decorative compass rose is a classic touch, although for an Underdark map, maybe shows directions that are known as safe havens. I've actually done several versions of this map. One is for the DM, which is this one, and I've got several player versions that I've digitally rendered, and they had the compass on them. And of course, you know, a title as an elegant banner up the top is an absolute must-have in this decorative font style that I've chosen for this map. And so finally, let's take a final look at what we've made. We started with nothing more than a blank page. We gave our world a foundation, a story written in some faint pencil lines. We excavated vast caverns. We left behind some colossal stone pillars. We made the big decisions that would shape everything. And then we brought that world to life with some ink. We committed. We used the different line weights to create shadow and depth, and we turned simple outlines into rugged rock formations and dense fungal forests. Finally, we populated it. We placed the cities, yes, but more importantly, we put the notes on the world building and the understanding of the history that we already have of this world so that it can be used as a reference point later on. And then finally, that is the process that I use to create this particular map style. The one that's so close to my heart. I've made several maps in this particular style, but I haven't actively talked about it on this channel. You might have seen this style in the previous video that I did, Maps, Traps, and Mishaps, which was a couple of months ago, but this is my personal favorite way to explore your world building. It gives you as a DM the opportunity to not only map the world out, which is very, very important, but it also gives you the opportunity to have a single document that you can reference or put on display that has the most important information that you want to reference. It's a trophy of your world, and you absolutely can be using it as such. So I really encourage you, use these techniques for your own world, see what you can create. If you have any variations that you want to do, if there's something that you particularly focus on in your own world that isn't on this map, I would love to hear more about how you would adapt this style to your own world. Because again, this is a tool that works for me, a tool that I really like and I think works very, very well. But it is something that you can apply to different situations in your own worlds. So let me know how you would adapt it, how you would use it in your own world, how you would change it. If you've got any questions, you can also stick them in the comments below. I am very, very happy to take questions and adapt things for future videos as well. And as always, I want to thank all of my Patreon and YouTube subscribers. It is an absolute pleasure to be able to do this and talk about these kinds of things on the videos, and I couldn't do it without you guys. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to let you go for this episode, and I will see you later in the week for another Red Quills map making episode. I will see you then. Until then, happy adventuring. Feeling of depth and separation there. The borders of the map is the space for my notes, right? And this brings us to one of my favorite parts of this style, the inset.